Our New Testament lesson is from Revelation chapter 22, the first two verses. It's part of John's vision of the new heaven and new earth. He writes, "An angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. And on either side of the river is the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And our Old Testament lesson said today that the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, said to all of the exiles who were enslaved in Babylon, "Build houses in Babylon, live there, plant gardens and eat what you grow, take wives there, have sons and daughters there, give your daughters as wives there, and take sons and daughters for your children, so that they might bear sons and daughters and multiply there." Those are the words of God's prophet. Those were the words of Jeremiah, and they must have been an absolute shock to the people who heard them. Those people who had grown up in Judaism thinking, "You want us to live with the Babylonians and not separate from those people?" That's not what they taught us in Sunday school. My mama and my grandmama is rolling over in her grave right now, Jeremiah, at you saying something like that. Aren't there some verses in the Bible against living with Babylonians? Truth is, there's lots of verses in the Old Testament about living with folks like Babylonians, because Israel had a long history of separation. Separation. That word and that idea dominates the Old Testament. It is the very backbone of Jewish history. And so in the creation story of Genesis, you remember God separated life from dark. God separated the sky from the sea. God separated the sea from the land. The idea of separation and the very word separation is embedded dominantly in the creation story. Move to the laws of Exodus in the very next book and the laws of Leviticus. Women are separated from men, Gentiles from Jews. Slaves are separated from free people. Clean is separated from unclean. Even particular fibers of clothing are supposed to be separated from other fibers of clothing. Lepers are separated from the rest of the community. And the list goes on and on and on. So yes, I imagine that these words sounded extremely strange to someone who had been raised and grown up in Judaism, whose creation, whose identity, whose faith practice was based on the idea of separation. And then all of a sudden God says, "Oh, build houses in Babylon. Live with the Babylonian people. Take wives unto yourselves. Give your sons and your daughters, and take wives and husbands for your sons and your daughters." You want us to live with the Babylonians and not separate ourselves from them? That's interesting. Have you ever had someone intrude upon your context, upon your world, upon your space? You really didn't think they fit in, they'd never been part of your space before, but now you look at them and they're all participating and they're happy and they seem to be well suited, but it still makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable because that's your space? I was running on the Swamp Rabbit Trail yesterday morning. I had run north a little over 30 minutes. I turned around and was coming back into town. I started feeling a little bored and fatigued, and so I decided to employ a trick that most runners use. That is, you pick out a runner or someone who's ahead of you by about 200 yards, and then you catch up with them and pass them, and you pick out someone else who's ahead of you for 200 yards, and you catch up with them and pass them, and it kind of keeps you occupied as you're running along. And so about 200 yards in front of me, there was a lady running, and I thought, okay, I'll catch up with her, pass her, move on. You know, it didn't matter how hard I ran, she stayed in front of me. I could not close the 200-yard gap. And not just 200 yards went by, but a half mile, and then a mile, and 2 miles had gone by. We were almost to town, and I thought to myself, I am passing this lady. I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it home, but I gave it everything I had to close the 200 yards, finally got around her, looked at her right before we got to Broad Street, and she was pregnant. I mean, really pregnant. She was with child and clipping along at an incredible pace, and my first thought was, she shouldn't even be out here on the trail. There's no way that can be good for that baby. She should be at home. She shouldn't be out here running like that. Now listen, that incident could either discourage me or, no, there's really not an or in there anywhere. I was amazed, having already written my sermon, I was amazed at how quickly and a bit convicted, how quick I am to decide and explain why someone else doesn't belong somewhere. Why separation is needed, particularly if they seem to have as much or more strength and joy and purpose as I do in my place. Judaism has a long history of separation. Christianity has a long history of separation. We have often tended to define ourselves as Christians according to who we're against or what we're against, by what we isolate or insulate or separate ourselves from. You know the old line, I don't drink or smoke or play cards or dance or chew, and I don't go out with women who do. It's the way I define myself. Definition by separation. We are right, the way we do it is right, what we believe is right, how we read the Bible is right, and everybody else are heretics. You know what a heretic is, don't you? It's just the person that lost the vote. Yeah, historically, you're the heretic if you lost the vote. We Christians have a long history of separation. According to Dr. James Barrett of the World Christian Encyclopedia, are you ready for this? There are 33,000 different denominations and rites of Christianity in the world. Now, most scholars disagree and feel that Dr. Barrett exaggerates in his figures. Most scholars agree that there's really no more than 22,000 denominations and rites of Christianity in the world. So let's just take the lesser number together. We have found 22,000 different ways to interpret the Bible. We have found 22,000 different ways of finding important, disputable matters that separate us. We have found 22,000 different issues that are important enough that we step away from each other. Kyle is leading a wonderful study for us during our midweek prayer services on the five issues that really prompted the Protestant Reformation. This is the 500th anniversary this year of the Protestant Reformation, and he's dealing with the 5 issues. Now, if he wanted to, he could have 22,000 issues to deal with. We could look at all of them on Wednesday nights, one at a time, for 363 years before we got through all of them. Christians have a long history and heritage of separation. And the irony is, Jesus came to redeem and heal separation. The Jewish faith was built on the idea of separation. Christian faith has fallen into this pattern of definition by separation. But Jesus came to heal and redeem separations. I mean, we typically think of Jesus as redeeming us from our separation from God. Sin separates us from God, and so in Jesus, by His life, death, and resurrection, reconciles us to God. And this is true. That's part of Jesus' purpose, to bring together this separation between humankind and God. But the bulk of Jesus' life, and the bulk of Jesus' words, and the bulk of Jesus' ministry was teaching us not to separate ourselves from each other. So when you listen to His words, He says things like, I want you to be one, just as I and my Father are one. They are going to know that you are Christians by the love that you have for one another. Those are His words. But even more, His actions. He called fishermen and zealots and tax collectors to be disciples. He ate in the home of tax collectors and prostitutes and leaders and commoners. He allowed anyone and everyone to touch him, and he touched anyone. Children, women, lepers, the lame, Greeks, Samaritans. In fact, the only folk Jesus ever judged, ever had a harsh word for, ever made feel uncomfortable. You look it up. The only people Jesus ever made feel uncomfortable were those who were consumed with their own self-righteousness to the point that they demanded that other people be righteous and made life hard for other people by pointing out their struggles and their faults. Here's how Jesus dealt with people. He understood that we are all struggling human beings trying to live out our unique journeys of life with the help of a God that we cannot see. And we are at our best when we are walking compassionately alongside each other, not trying to fix or judge each other. If the church is anything less than that, or if the church tries to be anything more than that, more than a gathering of people who struggle together on unique journeys with a God that they cannot see, walking alongside each other compassionately, not trying to fix and judge. If she starts doing anything other than that, the church always starts isolating and separating and not reflecting the heart and work of Jesus, whose intent was to bring us together. I have a friend who is a fellow minister. He listened to one of my sermons recently online. He called me this past Friday. He said, "Jim, I'm just going to be honest with you. If the stuff that happens to you happened to me, my sermons would be more exciting." He says, "How does all this interesting stuff happen to you?" Now, this is Friday, and the sermon's already written for Sunday morning. And so I just said to him, "Oh, I live in Babylon. I don't separate myself from people. I walk alongside people who are far different from me. I want to learn from their journey. I want to share my journey with them. Perhaps both of us can come closer to God if we do that. I just choose to live in Babylon. I found that life is rich and full there, and the graceful presence of God is easy to recognize there." And so I was running on the Swamp Rabbit Trail. And the first 3 miles heading out of town, as I was running, I saw people with boots on and tennis shoes on and gloves on and bags. And the Friends of the Reedy River were cleaning up beside the river. And I thought, I can't run by and not help. So I stopped and picked up a few pieces of trash, about 3, and threw it in the trash bag and thanked them for what they were doing and thanked them for their service. And it's all making sense now. I was really tired from picking up those 3 pieces of trash, and that's why I couldn't catch her on the back side. Our hymn of invitation this morning is hymn number 185. I want to share a word with you before I lose you in the looking through your hymnals. Wherever you run tomorrow or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Saturday or walk or live or work or be, one of the things that I love about our faith here at First Baptist Church is we don't call you out of the world that you are in. We don't believe that faith calls us to isolate ourselves and insulate ourselves and separate ourselves in this place from the rest of humanity. We believe that our faith calls us here so that we can be inspired and informed and moved to move back into our world and live in Babylon and build our houses and raise our families and make a difference in our world. It means running alongside people who are with child. It means stopping to help pick up trash. It means uniting ourselves with the world that we are in and being God's people in the world. That's the church we invite you to this morning.